This is one of our webinars in a series. Today we'll be focusing primarily on the What's New features of Autodesk NavisWorks 2015. This will likely be one of our shortest webinars in the context that some of the features that are in NavisWorks are great, brand new, but there's not really that many of them. And some of them are more subtle in the way that they work. It wouldn't be what probably most of you would consider a brand new great feature. But I'll be sure to cover all of them in detail. And again, if you have any questions regarding anything you see, throw them up in the questions. My colleague Reed Addis will be monitoring those, as will I. I have double monitors. I've set one of my Q&A boxes on the left. So if you have any questions that I see and it's relevant to the conversation, I'll answer it during the demonstration. But if not, I'll go ahead and just save it to the end, and then we can cover all the outstanding questions. So with the new features of Autodesk NavisWorks Manage and Simulate 2015, I'll just even start off by pointing out that there are two families of NavisWorks products. The major difference between the two being the clash detective found in Manage 2015. But all the features that I'll be demonstrating are available in both, whether you have the standalone version of the product or the product as part of a suite, whether it's the Building or Infrastructure Premium or Ultimate. You'll find that the webinar covers the features that are new to both. All right, and the features that we do have are sort of listed right here. You'll see that the first three and the most significant and probably the greatest amount of changes and what I would consider the most worthwhile updates to Autodesk involve quantification. Now, I don't know how many of you might have been using quantification in earlier versions of NavisWorks, or if you go look a little bit further back at Autodesk QTO. But just by a show of hands, and again, if you can on your participants or attendee interface, just by a show of hands, how many people here have either used QTO through NavisWorks or QTO through the product called Autodesk QTO? And I'll take a look if you go ahead and click your hands. All right, so you see a good amount of you have already at least played with it. That's great. You'll see that most of the tools that were available in QTO are going to pretty much now be located inside of Autodesk NavisWorks, which is great because now you don't need two products to do the same thing. And if you do look at it, it does make a huge amount of sense to have the quantification in a product where you can easily aggregate data and use smart searches and queries to find information about what it is you're taking off. The other improvements are sort of scattered all over the place. We have a little bit about the Autodesk rendering engine. I'll just indicate that and point out to you how to load that and how that's relevant. It integrates the Autodesk rendering engine that's been pretty much located in every other Autodesk product, AutoCAD, 3ds Max Design. Shares the same material library, which makes it easier to share on an enterprise level, but again, just sort of that's a standard by which every Autodesk product utilizes the same type of system to go about and add materials, lighting, etc. So if you know one product, you pretty much know them all in that context. One of the other new features is the ability to render in the cloud. Those of you who have used Revit or AutoCAD will have seen that cloud rendering has been a part of the Autodesk 360 offerings and something that you can access already. It's now a new part of Autodesk NavisWorks as well, so I'll go ahead and I'll show you that. There have been some improvements to Recap, short for Reality Capture, Autodesk software for aggregating point cloud laser scan information. You'll see what the improvements are. Some of them are going to be pretty just informative in the sense that I can show you what's new in terms of a feature, but it's not going to be something that you're going to see in sort of demo form. I've decided that I will go ahead and also spend a little bit of time talking about Recap and the differences, because there seems to be some confusion in the industry, rightfully so, about the differences between Recap, Recap Pro, and Recap 360. So I'll go ahead and I'll chat a little bit about that. And then last but not least, some minor but much welcome performance improvements in the way that Autodesk NavisWorks handles either rendering or importing in from Revit and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll just jump into the first section, which is going to be all about 2D and 3D quantification. So Autodesk has introduced a series of new methods for generating quantities from and alongside a model, which gives you really the opportunity to go from a really detailed model straight to quantification. Now, as you probably have already experienced, bringing in CAD data, bringing in Revit data, has sort of been what NavisWorks does very easily. But you'll see that with the introduction, and I wouldn't say the introduction, NavisWorks has always consumed DWF data, but now with the ability to quantify DWF data, and again, those of you who had used Autodesk QTO in the past, you'd see that it was primarily driven by the ability to aggregate just 2D and 3D WIFs, with the addition of PDFs and image files and things like that. But you'll see that one of the new features that we'll demo, and we'll just go through these 3 slides, and then I'll jump into the demonstration about the quantification, that you can open up 2D DWF files for quantification. You can use the project browser to navigate between multiple 2D and 3D sheets, and you have essentially a centralized project quantity workbook for all these so that you can take off an entire model and see what you've taken off in each of the different sheets. In a little bit more detail, 2D quantification comes with a number of tools that you see bulleted there. Polyline and rectangle markups, area markups, rectangular area markups, some quick line, which is sort of like a dynamic pick to say I want to choose this wall or this mullion or anything like that you want to go ahead and quantify. And then a couple of other quick things about allowing you to do a fill to create an area within a closed region, a quick box that allows you to select a number of objects and then decide how you want to quantify it, whether it's individual elements, whether it's the surrounding perimeter. You'll see that the quick box tool, again, for those of you who may use AutoCAD, that it'll be very similar to the ability to select a region and then decide whether or not you want to choose different islands. And then last but not least, if you're working in with a sheet that doesn't have a scale, you can set a custom scale so that as you do your takeoff, the values that you get out of it are relative to the sheet that you're taking it off from. Again, as a throwback to QTO, if you had a PDF or an image file that was just sort of not to scale, you could select a couple of points, say that distance is the value X, and then everything else is based off of that. And then last but not least, you'll see that there are some efficient 3D takeoff tools. Autodesk has done a great job of improving or adding improvements for this model-based quantification so that it becomes a matter of dragging and dropping essentially from your selection tree or through your find tools in NavisWorks and adding them to your workbook. The hardest part is actually setting up the workbook, and even that's not difficult, as it is just time-consuming to set up a initial catalog. But like I said, once you've established that, you'll be able to move through that quite easily. There is one bullet there for property mapping. Now, this is a feature that's already existed, but it's been extended for products that fall outside of the traditional AEC workflow. I haven't encountered it personally, but from what I understand, products like Plant 3D may not necessarily have the property mappings that you would already naturally assume from an AEC product like Revit and NavisWorks, so that if you want to map specific properties, you can. And I'll show you that dialog when I don't have anything really to map, but I'll just show you where it is so those of you who are in that industry, industrial design, plant design, you can see where you would go ahead and do that. So I still have a few more slides that I want to go to, but before I do that, I just would like to jump into NavisWorks and just show you some of these tools. And I'm going to go ahead and just exit out of this application, and let me bring up NavisWorks, which I have on my second monitor. And the NavisWorks interface itself hasn't really changed all that much. I don't know to what extent all of you have used NavisWorks in the past, but you would see that it's primarily ribbon-based with a number of palettes docked all along the perimeter. If I go to my windows, you can see what I have checked on and checked off. For the purposes of this demonstration, if you're looking to follow along or you just want to remember for later, or since this is being recorded, I'm going to go ahead and make an effort to point things out so that you can review this later on. Two things that we'd want to have checked is going to be the project browser. We're going to want to have the quantification workbook and item catalog in particular, and that's pretty much it. The rest will come in play, selection tree, obviously, because that's pretty much you can see everything in NavisWorks. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and just open up one of our first sample files, and that's just going to be a simple 2D quantification tool. And I want to point out one quick thing as I open this up. I am having some slight graphic card display issues. So some of the things that I select you won't be able to see until I move the screen again. So I'll try to do my best job of of pointing out what's actually happening, though you're not going to maybe see it on the screen. Though if you try it for yourself, of course, you'll see it as it's intended to be. So you can see that I just went to the open icon and I selected this first DWF file. It's a 2D DWF file. If you have Designer View, you'd be able to edit and annotate this. It's standard file from one of the Autodesk demonstration files, and it just shows the hospital first floor. And you can see in here that there is actually Revit data. If I were to go ahead and select any one of these objects and bring up my properties, and in that, you'd see that I have information about that Revit model, the fact that it's a basic wall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So this is 2D data, but it's actually intelligent data because it's derived from a building information model. So to start things off, I'm going to go ahead and go to my quantification workbook, and I'm just going to pin that to the workspace. And you'll see that there's a project setup icon here. I'm going to go ahead and start the process by selecting that. And you'll get this pop-up dialog window. I leave this on so I can point it out to either students or attendees of webinars. Would you like to get a quantification overview, getting started tutorials now? Yes, never, remind me later. I click remind me later so I can point it out to students, but if you've seen it once or you are curious to see it, go ahead and click yes or never, and you'll never see that dialog window again. The first step with any quantification is to select a listed catalog. This will sort of aggregate data into categories. I'm going to use the unit format for now, again, because it's simplified and it really just helps illustrate the point. You can create your own catalogs from scratch or use the CSI 16 or 48 built-in ones that come with NavisWorks. I'm going to go ahead and click Next, wherein you'll select your units. This demo file was from one of our friends abroad, I would imagine, because it's all done in metric. So I'm going to go ahead and just toggle that to metric. And you'll see that the property mappings that map our property takeoff quantities from model length and what units they should be listed are already set up for us. We could change them if we'd like. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave them as is. And then clicking Next one more time will just alert us to the fact that all the required setup is done. And we can just click the Finish icon to populate our quantification workbook. What I'm also going to do, and for the sake of just being able to view everything at once, is bring up the item catalog here on the left. This is essentially the same view of your quantification workbook, but you'd go in here and add information that dives deep into the different categories you want to take off. So let me go ahead and just tidy up my workspace. So again, you have your 2D DWF. I'm going to just start off by adding a couple of item categories. And you see that I'll go ahead and do an effort of holding up my slide deck on the left so I can just point out all the different tools that you saw on that slide, and then I'll go ahead and just point out what each of them does, give a quick couple of demonstrations on some of the features. Some of these are new features, of course, and I'll also just point out things that are great to actually work with while you're doing this, so you get a sort of an idea of the workflow. So I'm going to keep things simple, and I'm just going to do a couple of takeoffs for both scenarios for interiors, right? And you'll see that if I expand out the interiors group, it's broken down into interior construction, stairs, interior finishes. I'll expand out interior construction, and those are further subdivided into partitions, doors, and fittings. So I'm going to add a couple of new items to take off, and you'll see that I can start off with something very simple, right? I can just go ahead and right-click on partitions and choose a new item. And in there, I can go ahead and just type in interior walls, right? You can get as specific as you'd like with this, right? There's not going to be just one type of interior wall. There may be several, so you'd go and add these as you need. On the right-hand side, again, nothing new, but you can map color appearance and some item calculations for how these things get taken off. I'm going to go ahead and just set that to red just because I think that stands out the most in contrast with the stuff that you see on the screen at the moment. And with that, I can just go ahead and just zoom into a particular area, it doesn't really matter where, and just start analyzing what it is that I want to take off. First thing I'll point out, and if you ever notice this tool, it's the ability to hide background and annotation. So what it does is it queries the DWF file, in this case because it came from Revit, for certain type of annotated families. And if I just toggle that, you'll see that it turned off some of those room tags, it turned off section markers, it turned off dimensions. So it really helps you just in one quick go turn off a lot of the things that would just pretty much clutter your worksheet, so to speak, so that you could go ahead and do some takeoffs. All right. Now, In this quantification workbook, there are a number of tools, and if you look across this middle area here, there are a number of tools that I pointed out earlier in that slide deck. You know, polyline markup tools and rectangle, right? There's polyline and rectangle polyline. These are for linear takeoffs. There's also the quick line, which allows me to just pick model segments and add them to your quantification. I'll take a time out and say that for the most part, these tools are particularly handy if you don't have a BIM model and you only have access to 2D webs. You'll see that when we jump to the next phase, which is 3D quantification, that these are sort of not as necessary. You'll be doing quick takeoffs by a different methodology. So you can do an area and a rectangular area, so a polygonal and rectangular. And then you have a series of fills, right? So if you want to do a quick surrounding element, you can do a bucket fill. A quick box, which is difficult to describe, so I'll just go ahead and I'll show it to you. You'll see that some of these icons will light up once I've actually selected them, and then last but not least, you'll have a count takeoff that you can go ahead and just add for elements that you want to get in each of. So let's say a door or a window or a fixture of some sort. All right. If I go ahead and I just start with a quick line, you'll see that as I hover, I can just go ahead and select different entities, right? Now, the one thing to note is that for quantity takeoff, that you want to make sure that the item catalog item that you're selected is the one that you want to take off. So if I had to add an interior door, right, and I'll just say, you know, double flush, and that was active, if I was taking off, I would be thinking that I was trying to take off something for that category. So just be always aware and cognizant of whatever it is you have selected in the item catalog, and as you move through that and you start using the quick tool, you'll see that if I select a wall, depending on what it is that I've selected, I can choose that linear element, and all of a sudden it's added that to the workbook below. And again, I'll just sort of juggle around my screen space so that you can see that for interior walls, it's taking off one element, and that element has a particular length, and so on and so forth. Now, you go through and do this for the entire project if you were doing something very specific, but you may not want to necessarily do little pieces like that just one at a time. So if you wanted to do a long polyline, for example, you can select polyline, and what you would normally be seeing is that green tick, and the only reason you can see it is because I've done this little pan. Now, unfortunately, this is where my graphic card is misbehaving, but you'll see that if I start off there and I have my object snaps turned on, and I would invite you to do the same, right? If you go to your options and you enable snapping, you may want to just do either snap to vertex, stop to line vertex, maybe not so much snap to edge for this particular type of work. And you go in here and you could just snap, and you can see that with a right click, I've taken off that entire length right there. Now the line is blue because I've selected it, and you'll see that if I unselect it and pan, right, to fix my graphic card issues, you'll see that that line is red as well, corresponds with the object that I've selected in there. If you want to be able to just see what you've taken off, you can go ahead and just toggle the show takeoff, and it just disables anything that you haven't taken off, so that, or model view underneath, so that you can get a clear view of what's actually been quantified. All right. I'll go ahead and I'll just add something silly. I'll go to my interior finishes and add a floor finish, and I'll just say new item, and I'll call it carpeting. The reason I'm doing this is so, I'll help if I spell that right. And I'll make that like a purple, just so that stands out a little bit more, or a hot pink, which stands out even more so. I'll go ahead and I'll select through the area tool first. I'll select an area. And again, this would be sort of a polygonal pick, and then close. And then you'll see that I have that quantity there because I had carpeting selected. It's added that information there, and if I were to query around, I could see that I have 10.61 square meters of carpeting. All right. The ability to select the markup and delete it is just as simple as choosing that and deleting it, and you see it removes that quantification from there. So if you've done something accidental, you can go ahead and just delete it. The quick box allows me to go ahead and draw a quick box around an entire group of areas. Now you see this little glyph, or this icon allows me to do either by each individual segment, some segments, either the combination of elements that are closed off, so like a region. So again, it all depends on what it is you want to choose to display that. Now, with these doors, and again, maybe Reed could type in later with the Revit, I don't know if it's a view thing that you can set inside of Revit so that you show the doors, and my recommendation in general would be, if you're exporting from Revit, you probably want to be able to, specifically for quantification, you might want to set aside certain views facilitate that, right? Maybe off the bat you can disable some of the annotation, but I would imagine that you can set a particular view so that the doors show up closed so that you don't get that sort of quantification. That would be incorrect, right? If you still have carpeting or tile or whatever up to that location. Anyways, I'm just pointing that out so that you can become aware of how that gets quantified. All right, and then last but not least, there's a count, right? This is just simple, so if I were to go to my double flush doors and I go ahead and I activate count, I can go ahead and just drop in the count there, and it knows that I'm counting double flush doors. All right, so again, all these great tools for taking off 2D DWS, and if that's all you have, well, then this is what you'd be doing. But what I'd like to go ahead and show you now is some of the more advanced features which enable you to go ahead and use the 3D quantification. Right? I'm going to go ahead and just not save this, and I'm going to go ahead and open up a different DWF. You'll see here it's Autodesk Combined Hospital. Right? I'm going to open that up. And I'm just doing a quick time check, 11:30, perfect. So here's another example of another project I started. I loaded this 3D WF. Bring up the project browser and just point out that there's a 3D view and 2 sheets in there, right? You can have as many sheets as you want that would be necessary. I do have to go through the project setup anytime I start off a new quantity takeoff or a new project in NavisWorks. Once again, I'll just choose Remind Me Later. Once again, I'll just choose Unit Format, Metric, and accept the last choice and click Finish. And that gets me to the same exact location I was earlier. Once again, I'll very quickly come in here and add in a new item. Now, I could add interior partitions. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more granular so you can see how this works. Now, I'm going to unpin the item catalog just to free up some real estate, and I'm going to bring up the selection tree because it's important that I point out to everyone that depending on the type of DWF that you bring in, right, 2D or 3D, that organizationally what you see in the selection tree will be categorized in a particular way. I'll go back and I'll show you in 2D. Everything is sort of just blah. Everything just shows up, right? So you have this very unorganized list of things that you have in that 2D element, whether they're doors or finishes or fixtures or walls. They all show up. Individual mullions show up. Nothing is categorized, so it becomes a little bit difficult to go ahead and use. In the 3D DWF, you see that they're organized categorically as they would be in Revit. I'll point out that the Find tool is pretty great in searching for these types of things too. So for instance, if I wanted all items of type that contained the word wall, right, I'll unmatch character width. Diacritics, which I learned very recently, are the fancy letters that are not part of any English language. So think of the accented E in maybe French or Portuguese or anything like that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's something that looks like that. Right, so diacritic would be that kind of the little mark up top the E, and then match case. Right, I'm going to uncheck all those, find all, and NavisWorks go in there and find that item contains wall. Should contain. It did look like it selected something. Let's try that again. Selected all these walls, though it's telling me that it found nothing. Let's try that one more time. Basic wall contains. Find all. Good job, NavisWorks. All right. Anyways, you can use the search item to go ahead and query that sort of information quite easily. But what we're going to do instead is, and I'm going to unpin this, and I'm going to bring up back my item catalog. I'm going to go ahead and just create some interior partitions, but I'm going to actually, let me just repin this and run out of real estate even quicker. Right, because I want to point out that besides interior walls, there are various kinds, right? So your real task would be to go in here and just say, maybe that there's an interior item, let me delete that, but let me go ahead and just add a new group and call this interior walls, and then go in here and add a new item, and I'd say, 123 millimeter partition, right? And if I spell that right, it helps much, right? Expand that out, we'll make these red, so they stand out more, right? And now you're going to see how easy this is, right? I have 123 millimeter partitions. I have interior walls. Here's my workbook. If I select that, right, in the selection tree, it selects all interior partitions, all 791. All I need to do is drag them into the workbook, and voila, it's added all those walls to that location. Right? It doesn't really get any easier than that. So for the ability to quantify and do this, again, a very quick overall length, if this was a linear item, you'd see that I have about 3.8 kilometers of walls for this project. Pretty straightforward. And you would do this for each single piece, again, over and over. You can go at the highest level, right? If I wanted to drag in basic walls, I could do that as well, but you lose a little bit of the granularity of deciding what kind of wall those are. Everything is going to have a different unit cost, et cetera, et cetera. Now, because this is part of a 3D DWF, you'll see that as I go over to my project browser and I go to my sheet, that I should see all my quantification. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll see that, well, why is everything black, and if the wall was taken off and it's red, why isn't it showing up? One thing you'll need to do is just quickly reapply the quantification appearance, and you'll see that that information shows up. I'll also turn off the annotation. And you can see I did the entire interior walls that were 123 millimeters for this project in one go. All right. So again, very, very easy to utilize and take advantage of. All right. I'm just taking a look here through the questions. I don't see anything that needs to be answered right away, but I'll continue on, time being of the essence, with some of our next features. So I'm going to sort of sideline NavisWorks. I'm going to go back to my to my PowerPoint presentation and see if I throw that back up. So the next bulleted item was Autodesk rendering. Now that refers to the fact that NavisWorks now utilizes the same material library that every other Autodesk product uses. And I'm being generous in saying all. I'm not sure if every single one of them, but certainly the most important ones like AutoCAD, Civil 3D, 3ds Max, Revit, and so on and so forth. So some of the new features for 2015 is this sort of consistent library, and you'll see that there are various file formats that allow us to go back and forth and maintain the material mappings from the products that the files might have originated in, and how they carry over into NavisWorks. So specifically Revit, AutoCAD, IPT files, which I think might be Plant, 3ds Max files, and FBX, which is sort of covers a lot of different programs that could come from. One is the ability to do multi-core the ability to have more cores processing and doing the rendering locally gives you faster results. I'm going to point this out, and again, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but my rendering engine isn't working on this, even though it is working for every other application. I'm not still trying to troubleshoot it myself, but I'll point out where you would start the interactive ray tracing. Drag and drop materials, again, not really much to really talk about there, but I'll just give you an example of how that works. And then I'll point out what these preset and user-defined renders are. They use, very silly little names like coffee break, lunchtime, and overnight to define how these get set and what your expected result is going to be. It's kind of cute. I think it actually does give you an idea of how long it's going to take, more than just low quality, medium quality, and high quality. So with that, let me go back into NavisWorks, and I think I already have I have a project file here that just basically the Revit sample file for basic architecture. I'll just go ahead and just use that as my guinea pig. Zoom in there. I'm going to unpeg my quantification workbook because we sort of moved past that. So I just imported this file in from Revit. Very straightforward. What you're going to want to look for is any one of a number of things. They all get the same results. On the Home tab, you can toggle the Autodesk rendering that you see located there. If you go to View and go to Windows, you can also toggle it in this drop-down there. Right? Now, I've docked this somewhere in my palette. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and just pin that so you can see it. Now, essentially, because I brought this in from Revit, I'm going to point out that all the materials that were in Revit were automatically transported. Right? If I were to go to some of my saved viewpoints, let me just go to the living room, maybe from, I guess that works. Let me go to the living room, right? And at the moment, you can see I can toggle on sun, exposure, location. I'm just going to go make sure that my viewpoint is set full render and full lights. Now, my graphic card might hate me because there's probably a light fixtures in there, but you can see that everything gets toggled on. So this is essentially it. Now, as far as drag and drop, which was one of the indicators of materials, If I wanted to add some sort of bamboo finish, I could literally go ahead and just drop that onto something, and you can see that now that turned into bamboo, right? Probably a terrible choice of material for that particular object, but just illustrating the point of how you can work with this. Now, what I can't unfortunately show you is that if you go to the render output, you get this ray trace option. Now that should be highlighted. I don't know why my graphic card driver isn't working. It's working for 2014, not working for 2015. If you are having problems with this, let us know. We'll be sure to troubleshoot it for you as well. I do want to bring out the maybe help guide, because I do want to show you render how they label these little set the render quality, right? So you'll see this is what I was referring to earlier. Coffee break rendering, lunch break rendering, overnight rendering, right? They set some time limits so that if you want to do that interactive ray trace, you just toggle it, you walk away and either grab some coffee or take a lunch break or go watch a World Cup match or just leave it overnight and go take a look and see what you have in the morning, right? So 10 minutes, an hour, and, wow, my math is terrible, but 6 hours. So depending on what you want to jump to, you could select that from this drop-down, which unfortunately I can't show you because it's grayed out. I imagine there's a conflict with my graphics card, even though it's an NVIDIA Quadro. All right. So I'm going to jump back to my slide deck. Well, that was pretty seamless. Move on to the next quick topic, which is Cloud Render. Now, this feature I can show you, and I'm going to try to do a live demo for you. As I talk about the other, I'll let Autodesk render this in the cloud. All I'm pointing out is that if you are part of the subscription center, right, meaning you're on subscription for this product, and you have cloud credits, you can go ahead and send this over into the cloud. So, jumping the gun there, so I'm going to go back to NavisWorks. So I'm going to take the same view, and you'll see that I have the ability to render in the cloud, that I'm logged into my Subscription 360 account, and I'm just going to go ahead and toggle that. It'll launch the whole process. Again, those of you who have used Revit or AutoCAD and have used this feature, you'll see that it's available. It's the same amount. I'm going to do the current view, a still image. I'm going to do a standard, and I'm going to do a small just to make it as quick as possible. And you see here, for my cloud credits, I'm going to go ahead and just start the rendering. Right? That's all I need to do. Let that process over in the background. And by the time I'm done with the last two slides, it should be finished. And then I'll show you how you would access that via the subscription center. All right, so you can see here Revit is uploading its sample project, being uploaded to the cloud, and I've been alerted that this cloud is being rendered online. All right, so I'll come back to that a little bit later. So as far as the last stretch, right, Autodesk Recap, which stands for Autodesk Reality Capture, there have been some improvements for how it integrates into Autodesk NavisWorks. Now, I'll run through these bulleted items, and I'll sort of indicate how you would look for them inside of NavisWorks and what to look for. If I can step through these bullets really quickly, you'll see that there's 3 different conversion mode options: project links, scans, and voxels. Voxels was a new word for me, but essentially it breaks down to how granular you can get with that, with the attachment of the cloud or laser scan into it. Now, Project Link treats the point cloud as one object. Scans breaks down the overall scanning, right? So if you have one particular site that's made up of several scans, you can organize it in that way. And voxels actually will look at 3D groups of points. I'll point out each of these. I'm assuming that voxels is an end result of how things were scanned to begin with. But as Kevin pointed out earlier, do join us in a couple of weeks, if I say specifically in 3, for our reality capture. So July 22nd, that's more than 3 weeks. So about a month, a little over a month ago away, you'll see that there's a reality capture for 3D documentation that Langan is doing with us. Be sure to attend that to get the whole scoop on Recap, but they'll probably be able to talk to you a little bit more in depth about Project Link scans and voxels. The clashing subset of scan data relates back to that, right? Whether or not you're clashing it over the entire project, a particular scan, or a particular group of points. The ability to set an interactive point size. This gives the point cloud, as you see it in NavisWorks, a little bit more of, it makes it feel a little bit more solid. It almost looks like you're looking at a plane rather than a series of points making up that plane. And then you'll have several options for how you publish recap data into a NavisWorks document file, an NWD file. So I'll show you where you'd go ahead and access those. All right? And let me show you that before I jump over to my next slide, which is the differences between recap. So I'm going to go ahead and just start off a new project, and I'm going to unpin my Autodesk rendering, and I'm going to go ahead and just go to my options. And I'm going to go to File Readers, and I'm going to go to Recap. Now, all the things that I mentioned in that slide, right, that you just saw, conversion mode options, interactive point size, and publishing options are located in there. So again, for those of you who maybe are not as familiar, I apologize. What you'd want to do is go to NavisWorks Application menu, select Options, and then go to File Readers and Recap. And you'll see here that the different conversion modes for how it imports in that recap data is specified through either project length scans or voxels, the maximum number of interactive points, the cloud density, the point size and how big the maximum point size is, and when you're publishing these to a NWD file, whether you choose to disable the point cloud from being included, whether you have it compressed, or you have such fast access for quicker viewing. There are a couple of little stipulations that I'm going to just bring up the help menu for. I'm not going to go and read this out loud, but feel free to use the what I call interactive help menu. So you can go ahead and select help while you're on a page, and it will take you directly to that page. And you'll see that it made a liar of me. Now there it is. That depending on what you choose, there may be differences in the way that point cloud densities or the maximum number of interactive points are set. So be sure to read all these stipulations and what they all really go into when you're utilizing those options. All right. Now, maybe to give you some more concrete idea, I'm going to go ahead and just open up a recap file. And let's see if I can just set that to recap. And I just want to add more data here, but let's go to this dirt pile. It was for a demonstration file, and let's see what that ends up looking like. And if this isn't the file that I want, yeah, this isn't the file I want. I apologize. Let me do a quick search on my, for all my recap files. Let's do RCP. Let's do a quick search for that. While that indexes, I'm going to go ahead and just new, and I know I have some sample files for you guys to show off what that would be. So I'm going to go to Open, and I believe if I go to Sample, and let's go to Recap, I should have some sample data in here, hopefully. All right, just bear with me. I'll bring that up shortly. Take that opportunity to check the questions. Read anything major so far, or something that we can tackle at the end?
Steve, there were a couple interesting questions from a user having to do with wall surfaces with doors and how to do the actual wall calculation. I think it was square footage calcs, subtract the holes for doors. We want the gross square footage with no holes. I've made a note of that, saying that we may have to get back to him on that. He also had a question about when a file is updated, an NWC file, for example, how do you track the changes in the quantity takeoff for new and modified models?
Gotcha.
Model is brought in and changed. How do you track that? So,
okay, yeah, that I might need to sideline. I'll show you where that would happen. It'll be difficult to do that on the fly because I don't have the model to change. But I'll point out where it is, and then we'll keep track of that attendee and then take it offline.
I've got his name. I'm not quite sure his email address, but I'm sure we'll be able to get it. Or if he's listening to us, he'll send it along to us. We can get back to it.
Perfect. So here's a quick sample, and let me just go to my viewpoint and walk around. You can see that I brought in a NavisWorks file, a point cloud file from Recap, and what you're seeing there is the end result of it sort of building that point cloud based on the information that I've chosen. Now, if I were to look at the selection tree, right, you can see here that because I selected by voxels, I can drill down to very specific elements, right? And it might treat a voxel, again, if those of you who use NavisWorks, you can go to your selection tree and use last object. If I go ahead and I just choose an object on the screen, and you can see that it's grabbing a whole section of areas, right? Now you can go, I think, a little bit more granular than this if you've set it up correctly in the scan, or you've gone through and recap and edited, but that's basically the breakdown. The option to go ahead and set a particular point size, right? If I bring this down to 8, right? You can see that maybe not seeing really too much of a change there. If I go back up to 24, hopefully you can see it looking a little bit more solid, right? But again, that may be a little bit more difficult to see on the screen. And then last but not least, what did I want to point out? The ability to publish, right? When you're publishing an NWD, once again, whether or not you choose to include that point file information, you go ahead and set it right there. All right, and then let me just bring up my slide deck, and we're on the home stretch. We've got 2 more slides. It's a little bit more information about recap. Because I know I was confused when it first came out, and I just wanted to go ahead and just point out that there's 3 flavors of recap, much like there's almost 3 flavors of Autodesk InfraWorks. So recap and recap Pro, I'll just read quickly through the bulleted items. You can see that in recap, there's a desktop product, right, that you install with your suite or as a standalone, and it allows you to edit and visualize, laser scan information. You can process scans from any device and bring it into Autodesk software. And it allows you to publish some of these clouds up into Autodesk 360. The Pro feature, right, which is now the Recap Pro, allows you to do snap registration and add survey control to 3D data. Now, again, those of you who are like, huh, what does that mean? You'll be shown all the detail that you need here in our July webinar. But essentially, it allows you to go ahead and create a 3D model from various laser scans by picking a couple of points and saying these are the same points in each scan, right? That's a layman's term and a very brief explanation of how that all works. And then last but not least, there's Recap 360, which allows you to go ahead and act as a portal for all your reality capture cloud services. One of the great things about it is the ability to use the Real View, which is this web service for sharing and collaborating scans, and then Photo on Recap. So you take a series of photos and you can generate a 3D model from that, right? Whether it's for 3D printing or for use in clash detection, the sources of how you use that is up to you. And then last but not least, some of the productivity improvements. Again, I don't know if I have much to show you with this, but I'll point out where all this information resides. The ability to set occlusion culling, right? Basically, it's a fancy way of saying that NavisWorks disabled any obscured objects during a render in a camera view, right? So it won't look at that information if it's sort of obstructed by another object. There's an importing faceting factor that allows you to go ahead and control how faceted your elements are when they come from Revit. Now, in certain instances, this may be completely irrelevant, but if you have a very complex organic shape in Revit, whether it's a curtain wall or it's some sort of exterior wall that may be better improved by adding additional faceting, you can go ahead and toggle these in the options, and I'll show you where that is. And then last but not least, a narrow markup tool. Hooray! So very simple, very easy. I'll just point out that those 3 really quickly. So if I go back to NavisWorks, I'm going to go ahead and just, I don't need any particular set of data for that. I'm going to go to my options, and I'm going to go to my display. And here is the CPU and GPU occlusion culling, right? You can check and uncheck those of whether or not you want NavisWorks to go ahead and do that. The Revit faceting factor, I believe, is under the Revit imports. So let me go to File Readers and Revit, and you can see here that there's a faceting factor, right? I'll point out, because this is not a new feature, but if you don't know this, if there is a view in NavisWorks, in your Revit model called NavisWorks, and you go to File, Open, and choose that Revit file, that's the view it's going to bring in by default. Pretty cool feature of NavisWorks that not many people, unfortunately, know. So while I'm here, I'll point that out. So there's that faceting factor. And then last but not least, if I go ahead and just open up that Revit model, just to show you a markup, I guess. If I go to my Save Viewpoints and just go to the kitchen, I can go ahead and add in the Review panel, aside from being able to draw clouds, ellipses, freehand line strings, I have the ability to add, and oops, wrong direction. add an arrow from there to there, right, or there to there, there to there, and add any old text for that saved viewpoint as you want. So I know everybody's completely ecstatic that that's a brand new feature, but there it is.